Welcome to the Heart and Soul Wellness Podcast, where we inspire women by teaching applicable skills and tools and assisting them with connecting with one another, healing, and aspiring to their highest selves so they can reach their full potential.
Thank you so much for joining us. Today it's an honor to have Pati Reiss with us today. We are going to be talking about the art of healing through nutrition and how it can propel us with healing from addiction and mental health issues. Thank you so much, Pati, for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. And what I would love to hear is your story is so powerful and transformative, and I know that so many of our listeners can really gain so much strength and knowledge from hearing a little bit more about your journey.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah. Okay. Well, I am, I'll start with, I'm sober 17 years. And, but I've also been a certified health coach for 22 years. So that's always an interesting paradox for a lot of people when they hear my story, thinking, well, wait, she was a holistic, I'm still a holistic health coach, but then I went through a spiral of mental health, anxiety, depression, and then addiction, because what I believe, and many of my colleagues in the nutrition, mental health, and addiction field believe that all addiction, underlying all addiction is some mental health issue going on, whether it's depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, many others. So my journey was a tough one, as many of ours has been, those of us in this field. And I basically, when I went through my health coaching school, I was very excited to learn about nutrition. And I actually started working with nutrition when my son, who's now 36, was 5. And he was having all sorts of mood disorders, runny noses, headaches, hitting his friends in school. And I was like, wait, what's going on with my child? So I ended up going to I heard a naturopathic doctor talk. I'm originally from New York, but I was living in Connecticut at the time, and heard this naturopathic doctor talk on children's health at a library in Connecticut. And the light bulb went off, and I went, wait a minute, could what I've been feeding my child been creating mental health issues for him, and mood swings and runny noses and things that were just really concerning to both my husband and I at the time. And sure enough, the dyes that were in some of the foods I was giving him as a loving mother, were upsetting his brain. And so I started studying nutrition back then. I was like, wow, it was just like this bing, bing went off, and I kept studying. And I was like, wow, okay. And the connection between mood and nutrition, that was a big one for me, as well as health. So that was my journey with nutrition. I kept studying it. And then I ended up going back to school at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in Manhattan. And I was living outside of New York at the time. I'd moved over from Connecticut, but I was still drinking. And I was still smoking pot, right? And my wine at the time was organic, because I was totally into making sure things were clean and organic. And so was my weed at the time. But underneath that was an underlying depression and anxiety that were kind of running my life, and had been running my life since, this is where trauma comes in, really, since my trauma in 1966, when I was 10 years old and my father died in a car accident in front of our home. So all these pieces are connected. I ended up, so my nutrition, I kept studying nutrition, but then I was went through my own addiction. And before I knew it, I was in a spiral of a bad place with depression. And honestly, and I'd like to be honest with the listeners, I was suicidal. When serotonin gets that low, and I know that now as a mental health nutrition coach, I didn't know it back then, but it got so low that, many times people leave because they can't cope. And I got that then. And I did not take my life. I ended up coming out to Utah, which I now live here. I've lived here ever since I got sober, which is 17 years. And I ended up in the ER with overdose and malnutrition. Really, I stopped eating and I just drank because my anxiety was so profound that was the only thing that could take me. The only thing I thought of at the time. I didn't know about nutrition and amino acid therapy, which we'll get into in a minute here. And so my journey was waking up at basically a detox homeless shelter that my sister dropped me off at. And I stayed there for 6 weeks. And then I ended up going to a treatment center. And I actually work at that treatment center still, 17 years later. I teach meditation and nutrition there.
Awesome.
So when I was in the treatment center and I knew about the nutrition piece, I knew I needed to get protein in and, those types of things. But what I did not know, Sarah, was about amino acid therapy. And that came after I went through my addiction. Even though I was a certified coach, the school that I went to was not addressing mental health and addiction. They were addressing personalized food. I learned about Ayurveda. I learned about blood type, metabolic type. I learned how to cook quinoa, but I did not learn about addiction and mental health issues related to the brain. That just wasn't part of my training, as I was using during my coursing, right, as my training. But when I got out of the treatment center here in Salt Lake City, I ended up at a couple's home that was a sober living home at the time. And I found The Mood Cure, the book called The Mood Cure. And I went, wait, what? What is that? So I'm like, I read it. I opened it up and I couldn't put it down. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have been dealing with low serotonin pretty much all my life, and low endorphins, which is related to trauma, right? Many of the neurotransmitters are affected by trauma. So I read that book. I realized, okay, there's more for me to learn around this piece of nutrition and mental health and addiction that I don't know. And I went and studied with Julia Ross. And so I got trained in the neuronutrient therapy and amino acid therapy. And now I am one of the trainers for the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Nutrition, because they're both related. And we teach about the brain and nutrition and amino acid therapy, and as well as other things. As a therapist, the therapy is important. Trauma work is very important too. But the brain has to be fed, and the neurotransmitters have to be fed, and they're fed through food and amino acid therapy, and they actually upregulate so that you can actually navigate life again, and actually then navigate your trauma, because some of the trauma is very hard to tap into when your brain is offline.
It's kind of like we're going through this cycle over and over and over again. We don't understand why we can't make better choices or why we're not feeling better. But underlying this is the trauma, but also the neurotransmitters, like you're talking about, that we need to support so that we are able to feel better in order to make better choices. It's not just about, I love what you're saying, because it's not just about, okay, we'll just do something different. We have to be very understanding our brain and how it works and how we can make those improvements.
No question about it. And it was exciting for me to know that, when I was in early recovery, it was hard for me to put a sentence together. It was scary. But slowly, as I started feeding my brain and doing the trauma work, life started coming back, and it came back rather quickly. I was pleasantly surprised about that, because I thought, well, I'm going to have to be here for a couple of years. I can't even, put a sentence together because my brain was so jumbled. And slowly, I mean, it was slow, but it was also quick in terms of like, a couple weeks, a couple months, I started feeling better. And then I was able to get into more of the deeper trauma work that was necessary.
Did you end up doing EMDR?
I did.
How long did you do EMDR for?
Probably, I did probably about 3 sessions with my colleague who's trained in it. I don't know if there's probably more to go, but I also did. I started doing a lot of spiritual work too and healing work, and that I did not really get into till I was sober because I really didn't understand the whole God thing and I didn't know what that meant. And now I realize that the spiritual part of the spirit body is vital too. And meditation has helped with that, and chakra work and many other tools. Yeah. So, I don't know if that's helpful or you want to ask any more questions. I mean,
oh, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
I'm so excited. So Patti and I met at a yoga retreat and I will always remember it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So I was at a yoga retreat and she cooked for us. And that was like one of the first times I really felt really nourished by really healthy, rich food. And one of the things that always stuck with me is like how you talked about how you would create this food for like all of our chakras.
Yes.
And I had never like thought about food to heal your chakras. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Right.
But it was really like life-changing because I was like, oh, wow, like there's so much more to feeling better than just like, taking medication or and at that point I wasn't trained in EMDR and a lot of the spiritual practices yet or anything like that. But I experienced something so different, And so one of the things that I love about this work is that we're able to bring in nutrition. We're also able to bring in like amino acid therapy. We're also able to bring in EMDR, and all of these things really work together to bring in mind, body, and spirit.
No question about it.
Right.
I love it. And that's part of the 3-legged stool, right? Mind, body, spirit. If one leg is off, it doesn't stand up. We can't, we need all of them addressed. One of the things I just want to throw out there just for people listening and, as I explained my story in the beginning, I didn't know what I was feeding my child was creating mood issues for him, and headaches. We're not trained in nutrition. We're not taught it in the schools. It's a systemic problem or issue, I would say, just because we don't learn how to do that, and many of our mothers didn't learn it either. They're just like, well, we're just going to get, the meat and potatoes on there or, have some ginger ale with that. And fair enough, they didn't know either. So I think this whole opening of what we eat matters is big. And we've been run by this food industry, that has really pretty much hacked our brain. And there's a great book called The Hacking of the American Mind. And that's actually written by a pediatrician. So there are a lot of breakthroughs now coming through with nutrition and how important it is to feed our brains, that feed our mood and our decision-making and our sleep and our anxiety. It all is affected by what we put in our bodies. And learning how to, start eating organically and taking care of ourselves and, creating foods that kids will actually eat, that taste good,
right.
Can happen.
Okay. So I have a question for you. Actually I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
So we know that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We know that suicide rates are really high right now. We also know,
we've really been struggling with that for the last few years, but even seeing them at higher numbers. And that we have a lot of people who are healing from post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma.
Yes.
And what we know about PTSD is that oftentimes people are diagnosed with things like bipolar or major depressive disorder. And really the root is trauma.
Yes.
And so people are working to get stabilized and to feel grounded.
Yes.
But yet life is so busy and chaotic that it's often hard to find time to get grounded. And so my question for you is, for some of our listeners that are basically working a lot, overwhelmed, but really want to learn more and want to start practicing this, but maybe are going to have to do a little bit at a time.
Yes.
What would some of your like recommendations be for people who are like, okay, yeah, like I want to learn more about nutrition and I want to figure out some steps I can start taking so I can feel better with all the other demands that I have in my life?
Yes. Okay. Good question. Big question. But honestly, the more we can simplify it in the beginning, because there are a lot of demands, and you know that well too, with a mother of 3, right?
Yes.
There's just like only so many minutes in the day, but dialing in the food, and part of that is planning a little bit, and keeping it simple, like even just having a few choices of protein available in your fridge, like hard-boiled eggs, sliced turkey, tempeh sticks. You know, you can cut tempeh up, which is a vegan protein, and, you know, put a sauce on it. It tastes pretty good. You can, you know, fry it up in a little olive oil. It makes it taste a little bit better. So I think getting the protein is important. And part of that is blood sugar regulation. It also is protein. Amino acids are just protein molecules broken down, right? So we want to get the protein in for the blood sugar and also to feed the brain.
Yeah.
We also, though, need fats. So what does that mean? We need butter, avocados, walnuts, you know, things, peanut butter, almond butter. You know, there's a lot of things you can mix in for children to get those good fats in too. And then of course the veggies, right? So getting them to,
right.
And I know I'm thinking about kids because I think of your 3 daughters, but, you know, for all of us, to simplify it as much as possible, but realize that we need to eat every 4 hours. We need to eat some protein, particularly if you're a blood type O and you're a fast metabolizer, some protein every 4 hours. You know, or some complex carb, like a bowl of rice and beans or something, you know, with mozzarella cheese on it. And then, you know, stay away from the sugars. Now, the problem is we love those sugars, right? And it doesn't mean not having some sugar, but if we get the protein in with some good fat, then the sugar cravings actually go away, and you can still have some sweet stuff. But it's not feeding that balancer, that grounding that you're talking about. And that comes from protein and fat.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to say 2 things. So one is when I first met you, Patti, I started practicing some of this myself. And so the amino acids and increasing my protein, which, like you said, it's a challenge, you know, when you're raising kids and you've got a lot of stuff going on. Yeah. But one thing I think our listeners can do is actually feel the difference. Like comparing a day to where maybe you're not getting as much protein to a day where you are getting protein and vegetables, and then noticing the difference. No question. That you feel in your body. And then that's going to be our motivator moving forward. And even if we have a day where it's like, okay, like it was a stressful day, I ate too much sugar. Okay, let's just start over, right? Like, exactly. And so it's just this practice, you know, of it's a practice making ourselves a priority, and also our nutrition a priority, so that it can support everything else we're doing as well.
No question about it. And it is part of the experience of it, right? So if you're eating sugar, and a lot of us go to that. I mean, I was a sugar addict before I ever picked up wine,
right,
or any other liquor. I was like, sugar was my drug of choice, and it was a trauma choice too, So I chose sugar, but I had anxiety as well as a young girl. And it, back in the 60s and 70s, they didn't really diagnose it as that. You just maybe thought of as hyper or whatever, but I ate a lot of candy, and I had a lot of anxiety. And that was hard on me because I felt like I couldn't concentrate in school. There was a lot of things because of that I know now, but I didn't know then. I was just eating sugar, and nobody was telling me, oh, you don't want to eat sugar because you can't really think very well, and you can't relax, and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I think it's practice. And when we have a day of sugar, we feel exhausted. I mean, you're more tired, I mean, you'll have sugar and it goes up. And I was teaching this in my class this morning. So the sugar, you feel a little better, right? You have a little sugar, something, a bagel or something like that acts like sugar anyway. And then all of a sudden in an hour, you start tanking. So your energy goes down because your blood sugar is dropping, and you can actually feel crazy because your blood sugar thrown off.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about, what you've learned about what it does, like to our neurotransmitters when we are eating sugar. Like, what are some of the side effects of sugar?
Well, they're very similar to alcohol and heroin and weed, THC weed, is that they help us feel better temporarily, right? And this is the addiction cycle. This is why many people use, because we're getting something from it, if and it might even be helping our anxiety and our depression a little bit. We get a little bit of a lift. And then what happens is that those neurotransmitters, whatever they are, start down regulating again. So then the depression goes up, the anxiety goes up, the paranoia, the fear, inability to sleep, because the sugars or weed or whatever we're using takes it up and then it drops it down. And then we need more. So then you're in this vicious cycle. And then all these other side effects start happening, which is the blood sugar, which is, adrenal fatigue, because the body can't navigate all these substances, whether it's alcohol or sugar, or, cookies. Because they're not feeding anything. They're just basically, they're a temporary fix. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens from the use of it. Unfortunately.
Yeah. So it's like this moment where you feel a little better and then you feel a lot worse afterwards.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And yet I still believe we can have some sweet things. I think that life, we're meant to have things that taste sweet too. It's part of our nature. We just have to keep it at a mindful level. And obviously people with diabetes and other things have to look at it a little differently, but that's part of the diabetes issue we have going on right now, is because we've been eating sugar, and the body's just going, well, I don't know what to do anymore. So, and I can't produce insulin anymore for you. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense or not.
That does.
Yeah.
Would you describe the difference you feel in your body, your mind, and your spirit from when you were eating a lot of sugar and in your addiction versus like how you feel now?
Oh gosh. Yes. Well, I want to preface this with a funny little story. Because one of my nephews who's here in Salt Lake City was up at the University of Utah. And this was many years ago. I was, sober probably 7 years or so. And I was hanging out with him and his friends. And, just laughing, talking about different things. And when I left, they all asked my nephew, they were like, dude, what drugs is your aunt on? Like they were totally convinced that I was on some kind of a drug because I was too happy and funny. And I was thinking, wow, right?
Yeah.
Right. That, so part of that is that I honestly didn't think I could come to this place in my life that I've been at since I put my drug down and I fed my brain and I got trauma work.
Mm-hmm.
That I would be naturally high.
Yeah.
That I would be, and to me, naturally high means your brain is balanced. Mm-hmm. That yes, do I feel irritated and do I have grief? Those are things that come up. Sure. But am I in a constant state of anxiety? No, I am not. And I have not been since I fed my brain and got my brain on track. And that the difference is night and day.
Isn't that incredible?
It's incredible. Yeah. Yeah. Which is part of the reason I'm so passionate about it now, because I'm like, wow, okay, well, I'm going to try to help others get to that place too and learn how to feed themselves. Which is something, as I mentioned earlier, we haven't learned how to do, most of us. Yeah. We've moved away from the table. We've moved away from cooking. And we can get back, and it doesn't have to be complicated, and it can be fun, and you can feel really good.
Yeah. And it can be simple too. There's simple ways that you can integrate this. We're going to be offering like the MBSR classes here in the fall. So the mindfulness-based stress reduction classes. And one of my favorite parts about that is that there's a mindful eating piece that goes along with it.
Love it.
So like taking the time actually to experience our food instead of like 5 minutes of scarfing it down before work. Right. And so these practices that help us with living just a much more rich, connected life, where we're actually connected to the things around us.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for bringing that up. Actually, there's a book called Mindful Eating. Do you know this one?
I love it.
Yeah.
That looks familiar. I'm not sure if I've read it though.
Yeah. And it's actually written by an MD who studies a lot of mindfulness. But part of that, yes, is that presence process, being present and also being able to sit with your food and not just shovel it in. So, I mean, you could be eating a beautiful organic, piece of salmon or, and yet be moving so fast that you're not actually digesting it. So it's again, allowing time to sit and feed your body, your soul, and your brain. And we are walking food. Our cells need food to be created. So the more we're putting in these good foods, these good thoughts, our cells are feeling it, and our cells are happy. And when our cells are happy, we're healthy, and so is our mood.
I love it. It's so true, because when we're feeding ourselves, it's a way of nurturing. It's a way of communicating self-love to ourselves and listening to our deepest needs. And it creates more compassion and understanding for ourselves just by even the practice of caring enough to really make this a priority.
Right.
And I do think though, it is changing a lot of our programming. And it is changing a lot of the kind of culture that we're exposed to, which is one of fast-paced and sugary foods, or foods that our bodies have difficulty with digesting. So, it's worth it. But, like I said, like it's these small little steps that we take on this path as it allows us to feel better, we naturally want more of it. It's just,
Yeah, because you feel the effect when you don't, and I'm actually getting ready to eat lunch pretty soon, because I can feel myself starting to I need to eat. It's been almost 4 hours. And on that note, some of us are dialed into that because that's part of our nature. And I don't want to get into too much of the personalized nutrition that I work with, but I do work with personalized nutrition. So I look at your nature, and some people are fast metabolizers. They're what they call an Ayurveda pitta. and they don't miss a meal because their body's going, oh, you're hungry again. But then there's the others that are more air, and they don't get that hunger signal. They're not like, oh, I'm hungry, and could go longer. They get involved in a project, and before they know it, it's 7 hours before they've had food. Right. And that's where coaching those kinds of folks to have like a timer and set a timer and go, okay, every 4 hours, or 5 hours, you need to have some food so that you can then continue your project and take that time, like you were mentioning, to sit and just be with your food and not be on your phone or on your computer or sitting in a car. I mean, sometimes you do what you have to do. It's better to eat than not eat because you're not mindfully eating, but yeah. I just wanted to bring that up because for some, it's easy to go, oh, wow, I'm hungry. It's been about 4 hours. I can feel it calling me. And others are like not as much tuned into that. So they have to be reminded, okay, I haven't eaten in a while. Maybe I need to go, make some food for myself.
Right. So being more tapped into that. Tell us a little bit about your personalized, like the things you offer, the personalized nutrition plan and ways if someone does want to get some help. And then the second thing I was going to ask you is for somebody who is feeling suicidal or dealing with major depression, maybe some just crisis survival nutrition things they can do to manage the moment.
Absolutely. Okay. Let me do the personalized first, and then we'll go into crisis nutrition. Okay. So the personalized nutrition is, that's a lot of what I studied in school, learning that we're all unique and we all digest food a little differently. And we are unique, we all have different ways of reacting to food. Some people do really well with gluten, some do not. Some do well with red meat, some do not. So when I work with someone or teach about this, blood type, I look at the blood type because that's one of the programs that I work with. And the blood type just, the 4 different blood types, there are some foods that are really beneficial for each blood type and some foods that can be aggravating, that can cause inflammation and digestive issues. So I start there just because it's easier than getting allergy tests because a lot of people are allergic. But part of that is that in certain foods, the body becomes inflamed. So for instance, I'm blood type A. I don't do well with red meat. Blood type O's and B's do, but A's don't do as well with red meat. So my choice of protein is different. I do well with fish and tempeh and, rice and beans. So that's one of the things of personalizing, finding the right proteins that work for you. And then the right fats and, of course, vegetables. I also look at your dosha, and that is part of what I was saying earlier, that some people are, it's an Ayurvedic practice, and some people's natures are more fiery and they break foods down and they can eat. They need more cooling foods. And then some people forget and they need more air, they need more grounding foods. So that's part of bringing in your nature, what works better for you. And then the third part that I look at is your metabolic rate. So that's the metabolic typing. And some people burn through food. And they'll need more proteins. So they go higher up in that macronutrient, because we basically have 3 macronutrients we have to eat daily: protein, fat, and complex carbs. And complex carbs are mostly vegetables, but it also includes some grains and some beans and legumes and fruit, right? So we need all 3 of those. And some people burn through and they need more protein and fat. And there's a questionnaire that could be taken for it. It's called the metabolic typing. And that just helps you understand, okay, I'm a fast metabolizer. My diet plan needs to have a little more fat and protein in it. Some people are carb types. They can do better with carbs. So this is part of looking at what works for you. And then also what works for your family. because it's not most of us, I encourage people who are alone to cook for themselves and feed themselves because it's sacred. But sometimes we're also cooking for a family and we need to make sure we can get in what everybody's going to do well with. Right. So it's also looking at the family unit.
For sure.
The second question about pretty much like crisis nutrition would be having.
Before we go there, sorry, can I ask one question? I don't want to interrupt you.
Yes.
So if somebody wants to meet with you, what books would you recommend? Like if they wanted to learn a little bit more before they met with you, what books would you recommend? The Mood Cure, and
I would recommend the Mood Cure.
Yeah. Okay.
Only, she's got the Craving Cure as well too, but that's it's a little bit too. It's a harder. That's more for practitioners.
Okay.
Just because it's a wonderful book, but it's all about learning about cravings too. And the Mood Cure is more simplified, I think, for most people. And she's actually doing her 5th edition. So I would recommend that.
Okay, thank you, Patti.
Yeah, you're welcome. And back to the crisis. So generally, the suicide is low serotonin. Okay. And it can also be blood sugar. I mean, people can have blood sugar drops that are so profound that, their brain just snaps off. So we need to get that protein in every 4 hours. And here's the tricky part with this, Sarah, is a lot of times, and this as a therapist, that when people are low in serotonin or they have anxiety, they don't want to eat. Right. I didn't want to eat when I had anxiety, which was one of my issues. I wasn't eating.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't eat. I felt nauseous. Right. So that's an issue. So whether they do a protein shake, and that might be hard, or they get on some tryptophan.
Mm-hmm.
And tryptophan, L-tryptophan is an amino acid you can take immediately in higher doses to at least take you out of that panic, desperate state, because it's that desperate state that makes us fall into desperate moves and choices. So a protein shake, and have somebody, feed someone a protein shake or bone broth or get some L-tryptophan into them immediately.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause that's going to nip it.
Yeah. And also to be mindful of the sugars. If you do get protein bars, there are some sugars that are protein bars that have high levels of sugar.
No question.
So you want to kind of, that's one challenge I think people have is that they'll think they'll bring a protein bar to work or something, but
I know.
But 4 grams of sugar is like 1 teaspoon of sugar. Mm-hmm. And so if you have something with 17 grams, it's quite a bit of sugar you're taking in.
Oh, it's off the charts.
Yeah. So and our bodies can't process that much. That's why we're struggling with so many things.
I know
there's too much sugar in everything that we're eating. So just to really be mindful of that, because the protein is going to help with increasing the serotonin and the dopamine and even all of that. But we need to make sure that it's the right kinds of protein, right?
I agree. And I wish I could recommend some protein bars.
Yeah.
Which is why I created brain balls, because brain balls are basically like almond butter or peanut butter with hemp seeds and walnuts. I mean, and I know people aren't going to run out and make brain balls, but I keep them in stock because that's awesome. I was looking for those protein bars too. I'm like, well, dang, I'm traveling, The one thing I could say though, for those who aren't vegan, is you can get those turkey jerkies, like they're chomps, those are something quick that, there are a lot of decent turkey jerkies out there. It's not just turkey jerky. It's like beef jerkies and some of the other jerky. I don't know why they're called jerky.
Right.
I don't know why they're called jerky, but those are something that at least you can grab that is packaged, that I would even say is probably better than a protein bar, because there's just so much sugar in some of the protein bars. But I'm sure there are some decent ones out there. I haven't seen them, but I'm on the lookout for them too. But hard-boiled eggs, man, if you keep hard-boiled eggs in your fridge, you can just grab a couple of those if you don't have an issue with eggs.
Yeah. Okay. That's some great advice. And then what about if someone brought just like some walnuts along with like something else? Because walnuts, they have like 7 grams or something like that.
Oh, walnuts are fantastic.
Yeah.
It is. Okay. And I know a lot of people might say, well, I have an allergy to walnuts. I believe the allergy could be twofold. The nuts need to be soaked, because what happens on all of the nuts, as well as beans and some grains, phytic acid is around the outside of the nut, which protects the nut from going bad. So if you soak it, if you soak the nuts and then dehydrate them, and if you don't have a dehydrator, you can just stick it on a low temp in your oven on a cookie sheet and dry out the nuts and then keep them in your fridge.
How long do you soak your nuts for?
Well, walnuts are a softer nut. You can do it anywhere from like 6 to 8 hours, but sometimes I'll just soak them overnight just because it's easier. You just use water, or do you use other? I just use water. Mm-hmm. Okay. And a trick is you can just put a little tiny bit of sea salt in it.
Beautiful.
They make it taste a little bit better too. And then you can just throw them in a low temp oven if you don't have a dehydrator. And those are fantastic. And if you look at a walnut, it looks like your brain. Yeah, and they are the only nuts besides flax seeds, but they're hard to eat. You can do the oil. The only nut that has really high omega-3 content, and that's the best omega that we want for our brain, and it's got protein in it.
Yeah, it's critical that we get our omegas too.
Oh, completely. And every time when we do soak our nuts and some of the grains and beans, the protein content goes up. Mm-hmm. And so does the availability digestive wise.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Pati, thank you so much for being with us today. And I just want to let our listeners know, I still do the amino acids, and this is like really life-changing stuff. This is something that can help you rise from depression, addiction, suicidal ideation.
No question.
So we'll put all of the information in the show notes, and it's been such an honor to be with you, Pati. I'm just so grateful that you took the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and blessings to you all.
Yeah, blessings to you as well.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Heart and Soul Wellness Podcast with your host, Sarah Carter. Make sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any thoughts about what we talked about today, leave a comment. Also, you can find us at heartandsoulwellness.org and on Facebook and Instagram. Join us again as we continue to help women heal, connect, and aspire to their true and authentic selves.